David Rocastle was born in 1967, the eldest son of West Indian parents who'd emigrated to Britain in the wake of the Windrush generation. He was raised in the South London district of Lewisham. And now I'll hand over to David Rocastle's great friend Ian Wright to tell the rest of his story.
Unlike many of his contemporaries, Rocastle was not involved in organised football from a young age. In 1972, when he was just 5, his father Leslie passed away. His mother Linda was left alone with 4 young children. And as the eldest, he inherited some of the household responsibilities. While other children were out playing, he would help his mother with the cooking and cleaning and run to the shops when the family needed food. Rocastle grew up on the Honor Oak estate in Brockley, and his formative football experiences, like so many players of his generation, came within the estate's enclaves and nearby parks. His contemporaries remember a boy who was obsessed by the game, who always had a ball with him, and who, despite the obligations at home, would eventually take to organised football very easily. At 8 years old and in his second year at Turnham Primary School, he is already playing in the school team among boys 2 or 3 years his senior. As he grew older, Rocastle became part of a developing nucleus of South London talent. Danny and Rodney Wallace and Paul Elliott, whose career was cut short by serious injury. His own professional career began with rejection. At the age of 13, despite training with Millwall during the school holidays, the club informed him by letter that he wasn't good enough. Terry Murphy, Arsenal's youth development officer, thought differently. Murphy was also a sports director at a local South London school and, encountering Rocastle in opposition during a match, was immediately impressed. In The Nowhere Men, Michael Calvin's study of the scouting industry, Murphy remembered that encounter vividly. David was so comfortable on the ball, he had tricks. He would do stepovers and dragbacks. On Murphy's recommendation and after a successful trial, he would be signed by Arsenal as an apprentice in 1982 and join an academy group in London Colney which included Tony Adams, Martin Keown and Michael Thomas. The Arsenal that Rocastle joined were not the club they are today. Highbury's marble halls may have placed them in decadent surroundings, but the team had not won the First Division since 1971 and had captured just a single FA Cup in 15 fallow years, added to which their last vestiges of flair had departed with Liam Brady to Italy in 1980. Undermined by the precarious financial situation, the first team was also on the drift, finishing in a lowly 10th place at the end of the 1982-83 season and no higher than 6th in the following 3. It helps to explain why Rocastle's rise from the academy was so rapid, or, more broadly, why such emphasis was placed on the academy. Arsenal were in need of rejuvenation, and a decade before Manchester United's class of '92 established themselves in the Premier League, they would rise on the back of their own era-defining generation. Blessed with a blend of size, technique, vision and power, Rocastle rose quickly under the tutelage of former players Terry Burton and Pat Rice, and youth team coach Tommy Coleman. He would sign his first professional contract at the end of 1984 and in 1985 would make his First Division debut in a goalless draw with Newcastle at Highbury. Since legendary manager Bertie Mee's departure in 1976, Arsenal had suffered a difficult spell under Terry Neal and then a relative joyless 3 years under Don Howe. Howe may have given Rocastle his debut, playing in wide and sometimes in central midfield, but it was under George Graham that he and Arsenal thrived. Graham created a healthier dressing room. With the improvement in club finances, had to come a new emphasis on star players and, invertedly, a new era of self-indulgence. Graham attacked the squad's notorious culture of vice and jettisoned players who wouldn't conform to his hard-line rules. On the field, his tactical approach also multiplied Rocastle's abilities. Graham may now be remembered for his pragmatism, but his organisation and defensive focus obscured a fine counter-attack and an emphasis on using his wide players to provide that thrust in addition to protection. Rocastle, a highly technical player and a formidable athlete, was perfect for his 4-4-2. He was also tremendously popular. Rocastle's flair and willingness to express himself was a dose of colour during Arsenal's dourest times. And by the late 80s, he was collecting personal accolades. In 1987, he was included in the PFA's Team of the Season, and in 1988, he would score the winning goal against Tottenham in the Littlewoods Cup semi-final replay before starting in the side which beat Liverpool in the final at Wembley. In 1989, Rocastle had been an ever-present in the Arsenal team that won the First Division and memorably snatched the title from Liverpool on the season's final day at Anfield. 6 months before, in 1988, he'd also made his England debut in a 1-0 win over Denmark. He would never be on the losing side in any of his appearances. But, as with his career as a whole, a growing physical fragility would prevent him from ever fulfilling his international potential. His knee had first become problematic in 1986, after Rocastle tore his cartilage in a tackle made against Nottingham Forest. Despite an operation, by the late 1980s the joint had worsened to the extent that Rocastle's knee would typically swell up after games. With the attrition of the league season, chances for recovery were scarce, and as his range of motion suffered, so did his form. He remained highly regarded though. As late as 1990, he was rumoured to be of interest to Liverpool and also to AC Milan, where, coincidentally, Ruud Gullit was suffering from similar knee issues. In the early part of the year, with Arsenal out of both cups by the end of January and heading for fourth in the league, Rocastle had exploratory surgery on his knee. He'd return in April, and although he played with greater freedom, his recovery was too late to satisfy Bobby Robson. He featured in England's warm-up games for Italia 90, but short of form and fitness, was left out of the final squad in favour of David Platt. 2 years after their famous night at Anfield, Arsenal would win the title again. This time, however, Rocastle was only a sporadic influence, appearing in just 18 of their 38 games. 1991-92 brought a renaissance and a modified role in central midfield. But at the season's end, Leeds United offered $2 million for a player Arsenal thought already to be in decline. Rocastle may have been skillful and technical, but his impact also depended on little surges of acceleration, which, with his knee problems now incurable, was starting to recede from his game. Emotionally, it was also difficult to bear. The thread which binds the many stages of his life is the testimony as to the calibre of man he was. Dedicated and loyal, humble and loved by seemingly everyone he came into contact with. Arsenal saying goodbye to one of the most popular players in their history. As a decision, though it did bear scrutiny even at 25, Rocastle's knee exhibited signs of arthritis, and yet Leeds were prepared to break their transfer record to buy him. Unfortunately, it would mark the beginning of the end, the start of Rocastle's pursuit of what he had once been. Leeds United may have been defending champions, but in a season remembered for Eric Cantona's shocking departure to Manchester United, they played like relegation candidates, eventually finishing in 17th place. Rocastle spent 2 years at Ellen Road, remaining largely on the outside of an already overstocked midfield and continuously hampered by his fitness. A single season spell at Manchester City would follow, and 2 injury-blighted years at Chelsea before, with sad inevitability, his descent down the leagues began. The first at Norwich City, and then finally with the ignominy of a season loan at 3rd Division Hull City. In December of 1999, after 2 years playing in Malaysia, he announced his retirement from football. Good-looking, intelligent and charismatic, Rocastle could have had his pick of future professions, but a coaching career was expected to follow, with Arsenal chairman David Dein particularly keen to add him to Arsene Wenger's staff. But fate would intervene. In October 2000, Rocastle was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He would battle with the illness for 5 months, but despite intensive chemotherapy, he passed away on the 31st of March 2001. He was just 33 years old, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. Today, David Rocastle's likeness adorns the perimeter of the Emirates Stadium, where he stands shoulder to shoulder with Arsenal's immortals. In the minds of those who saw him play, his class remains as alive as ever. In his stunning chip at Old Trafford, in the slaloming run and smash against Middlesbrough, and in that prodded winner against Spurs. His was a career denied, but the affection in which he is held remains universal. The Broccoli boy who played like a Brazilian.